Well, hello everybody. This is Ralph Schultz again from Albuquerque, New Mexico, USA. The day is Tuesday, March 1st. It's March. Here on my video number 10 on YouTube, my YouTube TV station. So, a lot's been going on in Russia and the Ukraine. I'm not going to spend much time talking about it. I'm not an expert. I was right picking the date, more or less the date, beginning of last week, that there would be an invasion, but I misjudged it. I thought it would be short and quick, not particularly violent, just intimidating, and the Ukrainian army would more or less cave in, and the civilian population would just protest lightly and reluctantly submit to a Russian occupation. Well, the opposites occurred, and who knows what's going to happen, but it's not very pleasant, to say the least. With a lot of bloodshed and more to come, and the Russians aren't doing so well, allegedly, but it's now predicted they're going to put on an onslaught like they did in World War II, where they just bombed the heck out of a city with all their artillery, which they have a lot of, in their Air Force, and then run thousands of troops through there to clean it up. It may turn out to be that, which could be just horrible. I don't know. But there's plenty of information out there for you to make your judgments about. The U.S. was partially responsible in the long run for getting Ukraine into this predicament, and the Russians certainly, at this point, are finishing it off as the aggressors in this instance. Can't deny that. And like I said in my book, they're backed into a corner. There's no telling what they'll do. They being Putin and people who support him, although there's resistance now. Our military has underperformed, surprised me. So, in any event, I'm going to read certain pages, as I usually do, from the book. And as far as all this Nazism goes, there's no anti-Jewish sentiment. There is this Nazi element that started after World War II. It's a long story. It's in my book, and I'll tell you the page later. But it's more, there are uniformed militias with Nazi uniforms on and swastikas that fight for the Ukraine with the army, but not exactly a part of it. The Azov Battalion, the right sector, and there's a history of fascist political parties that leads up to Maidan in 2014. It's a nationalistic movement which is closely aligned with Europe and fought alongside Germany against the Soviet Union in 1941, and is very anti-Russian coming from that side of the country, and that emanates a lot of this talk. It's complicated, but things change. Now they want to have their own country and freedom, and it threatens Russia for a lot of reasons, legitimately be threatened, but it's just too complicated to resolve without some major peace conference where Ukraine is compromised into a neutral nation. Anyway, so what I want to talk about are three things today. George Kennan, a famous American diplomat who was Russian ambassador, American ambassador to Russia in the early 50s, and he is some of his quotes about Russia. He's very well known. My 4-point peace plan, yes, I have one, and then some wild things about the USA. I'm just going to mention them this time. In the next video, I'll talk about them more in depth. But just close your eyes, wait 5 seconds, and see what comes into your mind when you think about the USA or when you think about Russia. Boom, 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 boom. It's kind of interesting. So, from here now I'll talk about George Kennan, and we're going to start, he was, like I said, the ambassador from 1948 to 1955. He's on pages, that discussion is on pages 135 to 138. This is something you should really know. Most Americans should. He's highly respected, and he understood Russia very well. It still holds through today. So, this so-called Nazism is really a far right-wing movement that started 70 years ago which is nationalistic from Western Ukraine, and anti-Russian is its ethnic opposition in their mind. And it leads to today in their anti-Russian attitudes that pervade pretty much the government in Ukraine today. And it's complicated and it's a mess. So first I want to talk about my proposed 4-point peace plan. This is about 2 pages. You guys can hang in there. It's on page 133 to 5. I wrote this 3 years ago. Build up a cyber defense. The offense can tag along. Protect all key military and corporate interests. Connect all military intelligence services and key corporate industries to a massive anti-cyber warfare interruption system. Public utilities, defense companies, communication and media, transportation, and high-tech social media companies would be protected in one system. Protect the USA from being shut down and vulnerable. This is a national coordinated effort like the internet was starting in 1985. Emphasize the buildup of a quick stealth attack submarine fleet with advanced conventional weapons. China and Russia are continuing to do this, stealth-like subs with advanced electronics and weapons. Attack subs do not usually deliver nuclear ballistic missiles. They find and harass surface ships and enemy submarines and do reconnaissance. The U.S. has, at this time, 3 years ago, had 71 submarines, Russia 67, China 63. Some newly built to replace the noisy older ones. By 2020, which was 2 years ago, or 21, China will have about 70 to 75 submarines. According to Captain Jim Fennell, Fannel, retired U.S. Navy Director of Naval Intelligence of the Pacific Fleet, quote, "Make no mistake, China's long-term goal is to displace the U.S. Navy as the largest and most capable submarine force in the world," end quote. That's from The Economist magazine, March 2018. Many of these new ships, and when I'm talking about China, Russia, it's kind of the same. Many of these new ships will have China's new supersonic anti-ship cruise missile, which the Pentagon considers lethal. All this is what China calls non-contact warfare, the use of weapons, firing long-distance weapons. So, problem is retreating, and the U.S. getting hit, and it's public opinion is not going to allow the U.S. to get into a bad shooting war. Russia also uses submarines as escorts to their nuclear missile submarine fleet and has many attack submarines along their coastlines. Russia is primarily a defensive navy. Okay. This is really important. You're hearing it today. You heard it, or I wrote it 3-4 years ago. With the space race over, whoever obtains the technology to disable enemy satellites first will dominate the world. The U.S. Air Force has made this a top priority. And now we have the Space Force instituted by Donald Trump. On the TV show 60 Minutes, the new laser beam space ray was displayed, which has been developed in New Mexico, not far from my home. It tracks and disables satellites. It is surreal and looks like a weapon from the old TV science fiction series Flash Gordon that some of you may remember. Immense underground doors open up from the desert and 2 gigantic laser ray guns rise up to be aimed at outer space. Incredible. U.S. Space Commander John Raymond was on C-SPAN TV during a congressional hearing and emphasized the Air Force Space War Weapons Development Program. I was impressed. To my mind, this is the most important mission of the U.S. Department of Defense. It makes sense. No human casualties, no infrastructure or cities destroyed, no radiation. You knock out another country's weapons, spy and communication satellites, and entire countries rendered helpless and disabled. The idea is to get your technology there ahead of your opponent so they cannot launch a significant counterattack against, in this case, the U.S. satellites. You would not need to destroy all the satellites, just hit a few and intimidate the other side of the country to bend to your will and neutralize all their space race technology and weapons. Checkmate, it's over. The threat of being disabled by another country would force a nation to submit to their will. And if your communication eyes and ears are gone, some madman leader could launch a nuclear attack and wipe out the other country. God forbid. So now US, Russia, China, each of you must work tirelessly to win the space race war, because there will be only one winner. If all three countries reach this level of technology close to one another and is afraid to use it, then we will again be in a position of mutually assured space war destruction, just like the Cold War, but permanently. Spies will be in demand, a new career path for college students. Talk about action and espionage. This makes the TV show The Americans look like kid stuff. Holy cow. Yikes. So this brings us up to the only peaceful solution. The USA must develop very sophisticated, highly educated foreign policy diplomats. Not that there aren't some, as it is. A functioning State Department with the long-term goal of stabilizing the world, not primarily pursuing U.S. ideological interests here and there all over the world, not criticizing and pronouncing other countries' enemies. China and Russia must perceive the U.S. as not engaging them as a hostile competitor. The world is big enough to share. Remember the book 1984, The Three Continents? The U.S. must treat these countries with respect and walk a fine line between any overt or covert military operations and plans towards them, while at the same time maintaining an effective military in the background to be used as needed. And all three countries must encourage each other's economic development and have positive reciprocal trade agreements that intertwine each other. A prosperous, unthreatened country is a satisfied, happy, unaggressive country. And don't be concerned how each country is ranked in size of their economy. And realize each has long-standing important geopolitical interests around their own borders based upon years of history that at least have to be understood and negotiated if there is a conflict. Remember that. Understand the other country. Don't just live in the world of sound bites from the media. There must be a compromise without fear. The USA, China, and Russia are not interested in conquering and managing each other's countries, are they? This isn't fascist WW2. Why is the USA so fearful all the time, I ask? Three large nations, fearful and distrustful of one another, will eventually engage in a harmful war of some kind. We are all lucky no nukes were fired during the Cold War, a period of 47 years. Don't count on that again. In a recent speech I viewed on C-SPAN by the President of China at the economic conference in Hainan province, he said keenly that the Cold War and the era of the zero-sum game is over. It is the time for win-win solutions and worldwide cooperation, treating each other's countries as equals and with respect. Having state-to-state political and economic partnerships, restraining from dominance, rejecting hegemony, and safeguarding peace while supporting education, health, and youth. Excellent, that's excellent, bravo, if they live up to it. And like in my earlier section, the surge about the U.S. economy after World War II, how strong it was, and surged forward. Real strength is a strong, expanding economy with opportunity for its people, not the number of nuclear weapons. Keep that in mind as we don't pass social legislation that's needed for the welfare of people, me being one of them. It was denied dental insurance for a $1,000 bill because the Build Back Better bill wasn't passed. And, you know, I came from the upper middle class, highly educated. I just am in a situation now where I need some help in that regard. The United States is draining its resources to support an unnecessary military and foreign policy paradigm, that's the ideological strategy, that is causing suffering around the world due to the unintended consequences, despite good intentions, and, of having an aggressive, proactive, interventionist policy to protect life and liberty. At least it's been trending in that direction. The USA has been at war continually from 1990 until today, 2018, until today, 2022, with no end in sight. There is something wrong about this picture. The USA is making enemies, I'm afraid to say, one step at a time. Credibility is ebbing. Okay, I'm going to talk about 5 minutes about George Kennan. We'll finish it up. Listen to this. George Kennan, a great American philosopher, American diplomat, and foreign policy expert in the 1940s and 1950s, was ambassador to Russia. He was a He devised the containment theory to keep the Soviet Union from expanding and spreading communist ideology. He emphasized economic and political containment, not as gigantic military encirclement. What I write now is based on his ideas and public statements and writings. He was a foreign policy realist. So was Henry Kissinger and President Richard Nixon. Every elected president since Nixon has been an idealist, which is to a large extent the root cause of the failure of USA foreign policy and military action. What do I mean? What do I mean? From the time of the American founding fathers in 1787 to Woodrow Wilson in 1917, the U.S. emphasized balance of power diplomacy and did not espouse U.S. involvement in criticism of another country's political policies and ideology. This idea goes all the way back to 1648 and the Treaty of Westphalia in Europe. That emphasized state sovereignty and the right of each state to determine its own policies without outside interference coming from whomever, China, Russia, and the old USA. All states must respect the legal entity of another state. All states are equal and must live in peace with all other states. No one state shall have an overwhelming advantage to war and intimidate other states. This shall be offset by treaties and alliances of various states that prevent this from occurring. Thus, states with different ideologies could form alliances to ensure peace. This was a consequence of the very bloody 30 Years' War in Central Europe, fought over religious doctrine, Catholics fighting Protestants, a war over isms. Wilson idealism since 1918 has influenced U.S. foreign policy until today with its emphasis on morality as statecraft, emphasizing the spread of democracy and morality, which is the U.S. and Western European viewpoint. And dominance and control over weaker states, Latin America, from 1960 to 1990, was part of U.S. policy. In 1972, President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger negotiated the SALT, that's S-A-L-T Treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, limiting nuclear weapons production and usage with Russia and Soviet Union, and went to China to open a relationship to foster peace and understanding, which was non-existent for decades. Both countries were directly opposed to U.S. ideology and considered enemies. These U.S.-initiated overtures were not idealism, but were to reduce tensions and the possibility of war. Very practical, realistic, not ideological. That was set aside. Here's a selection of Kennan's ideas and comments after World War II. 1. At the bottom of the Kremlin's neurotic view of world affairs is the traditional and instinctive sense of insecurity and fear of the outside world. Okay, I want to say this in Russian. Alright? Вы слушаете, right? And изучать. Вы слушаете и изучать. Right? You listen and learn. Okay, изучаете is the correct pronunciation for that verb. You listen and learn. Kennan urged the United States to withdraw from its public advocacy listen to this, Michael McFall, public advocacy of democracy and human rights, the tendency to see ourselves as the center of political enlightenment and as teachers to a great part of the rest of the world, strike me, that was Kennan, as unthoughtful, vainglorious, and undesirable. In 1996, he opposed the war in Kosovo and expansion of NATO. Hear that? After 1997, that's what the Russians have been pushing. He said these policies would hurt relations with Russia, and it sure has. The best thing we can do if we want the Russians to let us be Americans is to let the Russians be Russians. I think I have said that a lot in my book. It is pertinent today, a rebirth of an empire and the fear of the West. Enough said. Okay. One last thing. And I just saw this when I wrote this on C-SPAN TV, May 26, 2018. A group of State Department, former State Department officials at a hearing in Congress. And I say, here they are, the deep state viewpoint, or deep vapor, or the blob, as it's called, foreign policy blob. This is a panel discussion sponsored by the Center for National Interest, a Washington think tank analyzing key foreign issues. From what I saw, they present a USA Eurocentric, condescending attitude towards Russia as weak and inferior, implying the current Russian state as illegitimate and non-sustainable. There was much discussion about how to subdue Russian challenges. There seemed to be a general consensus, including the audience, that Russia had to be carefully controlled. Could they be implying the magic word regime change or modification? This is an excellent example of the deep state, deep vapor attitude. Not an organized, formalized underground movement, but ideas that swirl around, are reinforced by discussions, captivate people's viewpoints, spread like a contagion, impose unanimity, conformity. Remember the popular classic 1956 movie, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers? The alien people impersonators put organic pods next to people's beds at night, which opened and absorbed them, made them controlled zombie-like automatons. Well, what do you think? Here are the panelists, without mentioning their names. This is their backgrounds. 1. A former CIA Deputy Director of Intelligence for Eurasia. 2. The former Undersecretary Senior Advisor to President George W. Bush. 3. The former CIA Officer and Station Chief, 1964 to 1994. Was a former CIA Russian Analysis Chief and Special Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. He is also the Center for National Interest Intelligence and National Security Director. This particular panelist seemed to be a realist in that he stated that the USA and Russia do not have an insurmountable ideological difference today, as during the Cold War, but have interests and behaviors that conflict but could be fixed. This leaves hope for a peaceful future. Here is a list of countries, and I'm about finished, give me 1 minute, that the USA has directly or covertly encouraged regime change since 2011, but that is also on the radar screen for increased future regime change. This can also include seriously weakening current governments, enhancing U.S. regional and world influence. North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Russia, which is the big prize. And here's another list of international leaders the U.S. fought or eliminated that initially represented the right to fight for the people's national independence and freedom from oppression, although sometimes they became oppressive. And I call this bad guys for the U.S., good guys for others. Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. Patrice Lumumba, Congo. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, Cuba. Salvador Allende, Chile. Mao Zedong, China. Vladimir Lenin, Russia. Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran. Fred Hampton, Black Panthers. Russell Means, Dennis Banks, and Leonard Peltier, who's now in prison over 40 years. American Indian Movement. Hugo Chavez, Venezuela. They've all passed away except for Leonard, who is very ill. So for now, I'm going to say good day, good night. I'll see you next time. And we'll talk a little about the wow stuff about the USA, and then about my great trip to Russia in 1968. 5 or 6 episodes here, videos. You can't miss that. Okay? And let's hope things go well for everybody in Ukraine. I'll talk to you again. Have a good day, and do svidaniya, which you know means Russian for goodbye.